Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jerome Fletcher. I'm an Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. And on behalf of County Executive Mark Elrich, I want to thank you for joining us today for the sixth Economic Recovery and Revitalization Town Hall. We have a lot of good information to get into today, and I think you're going to be satisfied with what we share. The program will go, I'll give a few grant updates, and we have a special guest, Mr. Nick Rajpara. He is going to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program from the SBA on a federal level. And again, as always, our goal is to get you information that can help you get through these troubling times. So for the grant updates from Montgomery County, there are two main grant programs that are still on our front burner. The Restaurant Relief Program, the state of Maryland released maybe 2 weeks ago, $30 million that came to us in the form of $4.9 million for more restaurant relief. You may remember that EDC administered a program last December awarding $10,000 to roughly 800 different businesses. This will be a continuation of that program. We are going to allow for new applicants. They are going to allow for new applicants to apply. They will receive first priority. And then once those new applicants are taken care of, we will then go into the database of those who have already applied and received, and we will distribute the $4.9 million in that way. So the goal of the process is to make it as smooth as possible, get the money out as fast as possible, knowing that much needed help is still on the way. We also received $6.2 million from the state for hotel accommodations, and we are going to administer that money the county government itself. We have also partnered with Visit Montgomery. Thank you, Kelly Groff and her staff, to help us review the applications. And once that begins, we look to get that program started probably at the end of this month. And it will be designed so that we can get money out to those who need it as fast as possible. The accommodations grant will help those who have accommodation places with at least 10 rooms in it, and they will be able to apply. And again, we will streamline the process. Now, there's also one more grant I want to tell you about that's in the works, and the thought process of it is it is not final as of yet, but it is on my mind and some other people's mind, and you should know about it. It is one that we are going to try to allow for small businesses to receive rent relief. So just be on the lookout for details about that. I'll be able to tell you more about that when we meet again on Friday, February the 5th. But for now, just know that your leadership is thinking about how we can provide rent relief to small businesses. So now I want to welcome and thank Mr. Nick Rajpara for joining us from the SBA. This is a great moment for us to have you here. Thanks for your support as always. He has a great presentation, so I'm going to be quiet. We'll let him talk, and remember to put your questions into the chat. We will answer your questions as soon as he concludes his presentation. But thank you, Mr. Rajpara, for joining us, and the show is yours.
Thank you, Jerome, for that kind introduction. I have please let me know if you cannot see my screen. If otherwise, if there's silence, I'll just assume everyone can see my screen here. We have, as many of you may know, the latest stimulus bill titled Economic Aid Act to hard-hit small businesses, nonprofits, and venues was signed into law on December the 27th. And the regulations were developed into policies and programs over the holidays. And as of January 14th, 2021, the SBA approved its first official slide deck for outside dissemination. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that this is not the best slide deck in the history of all slide decks, but it is the most current in terms of what has been approved. But the most current information that you could get is on our website. You know, you go to sba.gov /PPP. The URL is right at the bottom there. That is the most current information. If you look at the verbiage below the title slide, it basically says that, hey, you know, the information, if whatever the information is on the slide deck is, if it conflicts with any interim final rules or FAQs or future guidance, the future guidance prevails and it governs. So to keep track of future guidance, please do go to our website. When I do these presentations, I also have the websites queued up, and I also have that as well for reference. But the URL is right down there for you to stay in touch with the latest. So, and having said that, I also want to let you know that this presentation, which was just recently approved by the agency, is being disseminated. You folks are my guinea pigs. The Montgomery County government was very vigilant in getting the latest and greatest information to its members and its stakeholders. And I guess like the price of that would be you folks being my guinea pigs for this presentation. But I will do my best job possible, and I'll be sure to leave enough time for questions and discussion at the end of the presentation. Okay, so the agenda for today, the Economic Aid Act had a lot of provisions and programs. Some of you may be interested in other ones, such as the Venues Act and the Targeted EIDL Advance. But really the focus of the presentation today is on the updates of the Paycheck Protection Program, right? I'm going to be going through these different 5 sections. It's not a very long slide deck, but I'm just going to be talking through this to give you folks the latest information and update on the Paycheck Protection Program. Okay, so the general intent of this program, and I'm not going to talk through it. I'm not going to read you every bullet point. You folks would be could follow along and read it just as well as I could. But I want to talk through it, and I want to tell you the general intent for Congress in updating the Paycheck Protection Program was threefold. Number one, they wanted to make it more targeted for businesses who were not able to take advantage of the program last year, because you probably read the news reports out there that there was a slew of businesses, particularly small businesses, minority-owned businesses, that were not able to access the program last year. Number two, make it more targeted for businesses that were able to access the program last year, but still need additional assistance. So the businesses that's really struggling, they went through their funds and they need additional assistance to survive. And number three, the intent of the legislation was to make the PPP program, Paycheck Protection Program, easier to utilize, particularly for the smaller businesses. That was the general intent of Congress when they made their updates in the latest legislation. You could see that if you want to access PPP, there's a lender match tool that we have. If you go to sba.gov/lender match, you would be able to find PPP providers in your area. And I'll be happy to provide that link or answer any questions on that. So that's how I started. So now the relaunch of the Paycheck Protection Program began on January the 11th, which I believe was last week or a week and a half ago. The PPP first draw applications reopened. The first draw, again, is for folks that were not able to take advantage, small businesses that were not able to take advantage of the program last year before the application deadline of August 8th of 2020. The folks that were locked out or could not take advantage, did not get that opportunity. They had the opening of the first draw, which opened up on the 11th. The folks that needed additional PPP funds, they could apply for what you call the second draw, and those applications started processing on January 13th. And CFIs, and both of these first draw, second draw applications were offered exclusively through CFIs. CFIs stand for Community Financial Institutions. These are CDFIs, can be Development Financial Institutions, Minority Depository Institutions, your credit unions. Typically, any lender that is smaller and that typically works with smaller local businesses. One of the criticisms of the program last year was a lot of the PPP funds went to the bigger lenders who were lending to the preferred clients who had a bigger profile. They did not really fall within the small local business profile. CFIs typically work with their small local business constituents. So the SBA wanted to give them exclusive opportunity to offer the program on the first week, which was last week. This week, the PPP program, first draw and second draw, is offered through all the SBA preferred lenders who want to participate in the PPP program. So, as of January 19th. So as of this week, you could go to any lender who is offering PPP, whether they're a CFI or not. The last date on this slide is important to know. As of today, as of right now, the deadline for applying for the Paycheck Protection Program is March 31st. So that's a date to keep in mind, all right? So if you are looking to get a PPP first draw or second draw, the current deadline is March 31st. And this, of course, could only change with ensuing legislation. So the first draw. Who is eligible? As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, the first draw is really tailored for small businesses who were not able to take advantage of the program last year. So, that was a target date for them. And basically what the program also did, the ensuing legislation also did, it made additional types of entities eligible for the program. It covered the types of eligible expenses in the program. For those of you who were able to take advantage of the PPP program last year, or do know a thing or two about it, you understand that certain expenses are eligible for forgiveness. And if you do not follow the eligible expenses formula, your PPP loan would not be forgiven. The covered period is more flexible, became more flexible, and certain borrowers may increase their original PPP loan amount. I want to be clear and just say the folks that are able to increase their PPP loan amount are the folks that applied for the program last year. They were able to qualify for a greater PPP loan amount, but they opted to take a lesser amount. They could go back to the lender and reapply under the first draw. And again, the application for the first draw is at the end of March, unless Congress states otherwise with ensuing legislation. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the intent of the legislation was to make the PPP program more targeted. And to make it more targeted, they actually increased eligibility for certain types of businesses and nonprofits. They made housing cooperatives eligible to receive PPP funding. They made destination marketing organizations, such as your tourist boards, your visitor associations. They're usually associated with a city or a locality. These types of organizations are now eligible. Your 501c6s, such as your local chambers of commerce. They were particularly hit last year because many of their members had a downturn in their business. They could not pay their membership dues to the local chamber of commerce. So hence the chamber of commerce themselves saw a revenue decline. The ensuing legislation made them now eligible to receive PPP funding. And also eligible news organizations, particularly local newspapers, local news organizations, saw a decline in 2020. Still eligible, you have your small businesses that fit within the SBA size standards of small, and of course your nonprofits, veterans organizations, your 501c3s, your 501c19s, and tribal concerns, tribal businesses are still eligible under guidelines. Okay, so that was for the first draw. Now, the interesting thing about the Economic Aid Act, it created a PPP second draw. These our PPP funds are now made available for businesses that have received a first draw, exhausted their first draw, and need additional assistance. Now, to receive this additional assistance, they had to meet certain standards. First of all, they had to be a little bit smaller than the blanket definition of a small business under the first draw. The blanket definition of a small business under the first draw was 500 or less employees. To get a second draw, you had to have 300 or less employees, and you got to show a revenue decline of 25% in any given quarter in 2020 compared to the same quarter in 2019. The loan amount has changed as well. Under the first draw, you qualify for a loan amount up to $10 million. For those who are familiar with how loan amounts are calculated, it's uniform, irrespective of what lender you use. The SBA gave each lender uniform underwriting guidelines, and the underwriting guidelines for a loan amount was you take your average monthly payroll cost for 2019 before the pandemic, or 2020 before the pandemic, and you multiply it by 2.5, and that would be your loan amount. And that was capped at 10 million under the first draw. Well, under the second draw, the cap is 2 million. It is a little different for the businesses that are in the food service and the accommodation sector. They get a higher loan amount, or they have a higher loan amount formula. What they would do is they would, to get, if you're in the NAICS code 72, which is food service accommodation, since you were hit pretty hard, Congress is giving you a higher multiplier to receive a higher loan amount. So if you're in these industries, you would take your average monthly payroll, you would multiply it by 3.5% instead of 2.5%, and that would be your loan amount. The cap would still be the same, which is $2 million. To get the second draw, there's a form that the SBA has released on this website, the 2483 SD. Your lender, PPP lender, should have this form or a lender equivalent. So you could go to the SBA website. Your best bet, if you're interested in the second draw, is contact your PPP lender. Okay, additional eligibility. I mentioned this, but just to quickly reiterate, you have to have exhausted your first draw. I was just on the phone with one of the original applicants I spoke to. They have a pretty big salon in Washington, D.C., where I live. He was interested in second draw, but he's not used the funds. And the first thing I told him to be eligible is you got to exhaust your PPP first draw before you could receive your second draw. The second criteria, again, you got to have 300 or less employees, and you got to be able to demonstrate a 25% reduction in gross receipts compared to any comparable quarter in 2019. Now, this is key. You got to match quarter for quarter. So if you, let's say, want to show a revenue decline in the fourth quarter of 2020, you got to compare that to your revenues in the fourth quarter of 2019. And that would be your look back or comparison period. Okay, another update that Congress made. Your EIDL advance is no longer deducted from the forgiveness payment. For those of you who were looking to apply or have applied last year for forgiveness, what you had to do is you had to state if you did receive an EIDL advance, you had to state that amount on your PPP forgiveness application, and that amount would be subtracted from your forgiveness amount. That is no longer the case. Your EIDL advance would no longer be deducted. The SBA will be reaching out to your lender and would be making them whole in your EIDL advance, so your lender would not be collecting the advance payments from you, from your PPP, or, for whatever amount that was not forgiven from your PPP because you received an advance. Another update that Congress made. Under the old legislation, under the CARES Act, when you did receive your PPP loan, that was a taxable event. The Economic Aid Act corrected that and said that if you do receive a PPP loan, that is not a taxable event. Do consult the IRS and your tax preparer for people. Your PPP loans are not taxable anymore. Another thing, another tax update is that when you received your PPP funding and you spent it on certain eligible expenses, some of those expenses were tax deductible. The IRS said last year before the Economic Aid Act, the IRS was considering those expenses as non-deductible if they were forgiven. The latest legislation corrected that, said that you could still receive expenses that are forgiven by PPP, and you could deduct those expenses as well for tax purposes. So that is another update for PPP, and expanded, and also there's expanded expenses. Last year, so basically to get your loan forgiven, there was a formula that you had to follow for the Paycheck Protection Program. You had to spend at least 60% of your loan proceeds on payroll cost. The other 40% you could spend in this bucket called eligible expenses. And last year, those eligible expenses were limited. They were rent, they were mortgage interest, and gas, electric. The latest legislation expanded those other non-payroll eligible expenses to include other things such as PPE for your business. So if let's say you install plexiglass, or you got PPP equipment for your employees, that is now an eligible expense which you could use your PPP loans for and still have them forgiven within being in that 40% criteria of other eligible expenses. And if you look at the last bullet point, there's a simplified forgiveness application for PPP loans under $150,000. Now, remember I told you that this slide deck is likely to be outdated in real time. As of yesterday, the forgiveness amount of PPP loans under $150,000 was released. And in the slide deck, it shows it will be released, but is it coming soon? But it has already come. So hence, what I'm reiterating right at the beginning of the presentation, our website, the SBA website, is the best and the most current information that you could get for this program and other SBA programs. And you could get the simplified forgiveness application for a PPP loan amount under $150,000 on the SBA website. I also have it queued up, so I could share that in the question and answer session if needed. And additionally, what you need to know, remember, the Paycheck Protection Program is offered through a third-party lender. If you are working with a lender, contact them. If you have already received some PPP funds from a lender, circle back with them. If you have not, go to the SBA.gov lender match website. The URL is provided right there on the slide. What this would allow you to do is fill out your business profile, and it will spit out your business profile to all the lenders in your area. And within 24 hours, you will receive a response of all the lenders that want to work with you. And of course, the latest information is on our website, sba.gov/PPP. You could also follow along, at the sba.gov/updates. And also, we have some resource partners you could work with at no cost. These are folks, or I shouldn't say folks, but these are actually organizations that the SBA funds. This is your SCORE, your Service Corps Retired Executives, your Small Business Development Centers, your Women's Business Centers. SBA funds all these organizations to provide you counseling and assistance to help not only with these programs, but other programs as well. You could find your local assistance providers on that website. in the upper right-hand corner, sba.gov/local assistance. And there's also our contact information as well. Having said that, I will yield the floor back to Mr. Fletcher and allow for questions.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it. Great amount of information. And I like the fact that you gave us the most current version, and we're happy to be your guinea pigs and get information out as fast as we can. We do have a couple of questions, so let me get to them. These actually came from one of our chamber leaders, and the question is, once the bank sends the application to SBA, how long does it take to get the funds, and will the funds be sent directly back to one's bank or sent by check to the applicant?
Okay, very, very good question. There is in the latest legislation, they have introduced a little bit of a lag time as to, as to when the application submitted, as to when the applicant gets an assigned loan number. And they introduced a lag time of a couple days to basically clamp down on fraud. There is, there was a timeline as to, and forgive me, it's been a while since I've done the initial PPP. There was a required timeline as to when the application submitted, and to when the application has to be processed. I could definitely follow that up. I believe it was like 30 days or so, as to when you apply, your lender has to process the application, and the SBA approves it within a couple of weeks, and the lender has to disperse the funds within, I believe, 2 weeks after that. So I would be happy to get that timeline. I do apologize. I don't have that information off the top of my head at this moment.
No, that's fine. Thank you. If you get that to us, we'll make sure that we get it to the person responsible for the question. Not a problem at all. The next question.
And please do feel free to share my email and my contact information. They could get in touch with me directly if they need.
Okay, we can do that as well. Do you have any information on the employee retention tax credit? It's been difficult to apply for this credit.
Okay. Employee retention tax credit, not an SBA program, but let me tell you what I do know about it. Under the old legislation, the CARES Act, which was passed into law last year, small businesses had to choose between the employee retention tax credit. This is basically the tax credit that you received for retaining an employee. I believe under the old legislation, it was $5,000 per employee. You had to make a choice between that and the Paycheck Protection Program, receiving PPP funds. Under the new legislation, you could take advantage of both. To take advantage of the employee retention tax credit, you want to go to the IRS website and you want to go to the Department of Labor website. There's an other website that Treasury has, which basically is an umbrella source of all the pandemic assistance programs for small businesses. Unfortunately, I don't have that up right now, but I could get that URL quite easily. But it talks about the employee retention tax credit and how it plays with the latest round of PPP.
All right, that would be awesome. The next one is a more specific question. It says, I own a restaurant in which we were close to the 25% gross receipt requirement, but not close enough. There are several other restaurant owners I have talked to that are in the same situation. The gross receipts don't take into account the loss of profits to delivery services like Uber Eats, DoorDash, etc. The closing of processing plants for beef, chicken, etc. created a very high increase of cost of goods. All of our profits were wiped out, even though the revenue doesn't look that bad. Is there any way to get help in this situation? Many of the business owners I have talked to were relying on the second draw, which they will no longer receive under these guidelines.
Yeah, very good question. And I wish I had some good news to deliver right now on that. Under the current legislation, the formula is very strict. In fact, I was just on the phone with a local restaurateur in Washington, D.C., who was telling me something very similar, saying, hey, look, I'm close, but my profits have been wiped out. particularly I'm using these third-party delivery services. And if you look at gross receipts, I would not qualify. Is there another way, another formula? Under the current legislation, there is not. What I could tell you, the best thing I could tell you is the guidelines are continually being updated. Please do reach out to your local representative in Congress. Let them know your situation. They're very instrumental in developing additional guidance known as, and is put out by interim final rules. And I had to tell you, when PPP was rolled out last year, it was a mess, and I'll be the first to tell you, it was applicable for a lot of small businesses, but the SBA issued a lot of additional guidance. And the additional guidance was a result of hearing from the small business community. I'm sorry, it's not that I can't give you a better immediate answer, but that's the best thing you could do right now at this moment is you contact your legislature and your local representative of Congress and give them your input to update the guidance.
Yeah, no, that is a tough situation. And, we hear situations like this quite often where people, they have enough loss to affect them, of course, and their families and their businesses. But then when it comes to the program, every program doesn't fit everyone into the same box, so it is difficult. But knowing that your program and how much you're trying to help everyone is something that we've got to try to take advantage of.
And may I say something on that, Jerome, if I may, just a little add on to that. It is important to know that you get to pick whatever quarter you want to compare to. So, you have 3 quarters you could pick from or in 2020. Because assuming the pandemic hit, at the end of March, you get to pick any quarter and show a decline in gross receipts of 25%. So if any given quarter there was a revenue decline, I would pick the steepest quarter with a gross revenue decline and use that as the comparison quarter to 2019.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense, and I hope everyone understands that. I'm going to, let me just make sure, we did have 2 other questions that were submitted in advance. Let me make sure that we took care of those 2. One was, can a business apply for the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant and PPP?
Unfortunately, no, not under the current legislation. You got to take a pick, whether you're going to see the Shuttered Venues Grant or PPP.
All right, makes sense. The other one was, we are looking for an explanation of the reauthorized EIDL advance program. Are companies that received a 10,000 EIDL advance in the first round eligible for this round as well? I think we may have.
Yeah, okay, so under the latest legislation, the Economic Aid Act, the EIDL advance was not really reintroduced, but it was repositioned. It's called the targeted advance. It was reintroduced to certain folks. And in fact, I'm not sure if I could share my screen here, but if you do go to, there's a screen that you could go to. If it's okay, if I could share my screen.
Yeah, go right ahead.
That would, I think that'll help your audience here. Go to this website right here. This is where all the pandemic assistance programs are and are housed, the information's housed, the venues grant came up. The EIDL advance is under this tab right here, the Paycheck Protection Program. Some of these tabs are not updated, like these 2 are not, but this has been updated. The EIDL advance is right here. And now, if you go right here, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Nick, all I see is a PowerPoint. I'm not sure if others.
Oh, my mistake. Let me see if I.
It's like your cursor's right there at the top of the PowerPoint, but it might be my computer. But
no. Let me make sure. I think I need to. So it was tricky when sharing the screen here. All right. Share tray. And can you folks see this?
Yes. There you go.
Okay. All right. So what I was saying earlier, let me just back up here. This is a homepage for all the pandemic assistance relief programs.
Okay.
Virus relief options of the SBA. There's all the programs housed in this website. Some of the programs are updated, like these top 3 right here. These bottom 2 I know are not updated, but in the process of being updated. But this is your best source of information, not the slide deck I just showed you. That slide deck I showed you is static. This is dynamic. This is flexible. But the question was on the EIDL advance. The latest legislation has reintroduced the advance in a targeted fashion. And to find out about it, they actually are calling it the targeted EIDL advance. Could you folks see this, or could you see this, Jerome?
Yeah, we see it. Yes, sir.
Okay. So the targeted advance is not for everyone. It is for certain folks. They had to meet these criteria. So basically, under the old legislation, the way the EIDL advance, and let me just back up, so I don't confuse anyone. Under the CARES Act, which was passed into law in March 27th, 2020, it added a provision to the economic injury disaster loan. The economic injury disaster loan predated the CARES Act. It's a direct loan from the SBA to the afflicted business of a disaster, and the SBA makes that loan at a low interest. Okay. Now that program was around for a long time. It was a small part of what the SBA did. After the pandemic, it became one of the biggest parts of what the SBA does. It just changed the scope of our agency tremendously. What Congress did was it added a provision to the EIDL program known as Advance. The Advance is basically a $1,000 grant for every employee that your business has, capped at $10,000. Okay. So last year, if you applied for the EIDL loan, or you would, or even if you didn't apply, you were still eligible for this advance. This advance was $1,000 per employee, no questions asked, basically. But it was capped at $10,000. It was per employee. Now, the issue was if you were, let's say, a one-person shop, you get $1,000. Right. If you were a 10-person shop, you get $10,000. If you're a 30-person shop, you still get $10,000. Right? But let's say if you're a one-person shop, under the new legislation, but let's say if you're in a low-income community, what is defined here? Under the current legislation, you could go back and get the full $10,000 if you are in what the SBA defines as right here, a low-income community defined in Section 45E of the Internal Revenue Code. Now, what basically, you can look up 45E of the Internal Revenue Code. I'm sorry, folks, all this government speak here, but basically, these are low-income communities that qualify for what they call the New Market Tax Credit. You could Google your area or use a search, whatever search engine you want to find out if your particular community where your business is located is in a low-income community that qualifies for a New Market Tax Credit. So that you had to be in that, and you had to show that you have a 30% reduction in revenue that began after March 2nd in your business. So that's how you could get the additional EIDL advance. So even if you're a one-person shop, you could get an additional $9,000 if you meet these criteria. You also had to have 300 for your employees. So that's typically how it works. Okay. All right. Very helpful. And thanks for sharing that website as well. And we have one new question. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, yeah, okay, they just said now they can see. Let me go back. I just shared the Think Moco web page. Oh, I think I just spelled it wrong. Hold on. It's not gonna get there. What I want people to go see is the different programs, and your program is actually on their page. And let me see if I can share my screen and go there. Here.
So this is our friends at the Economic Development Corporation, their webpage. And they have a very robust list here of various different resources that can help everyone on this call. And you go here, and I won't go to a lot of these websites, I don't want to lose people, but the county web information is here as well. The SBA information is over here as well. It talks about programs that we have that are closed, programs that are open. There's just so much out there, programs from the state. At every level of government, whether it's local, state, or federal, the resources out there to acknowledge those who are in need are just tremendous. Is it enough? No. And that's because, there's not enough to help everyone as much as they need help right now. We are trying to do our best with providing resources so that people can hopefully stay afloat as long as they can. When we hear comments like, the vaccine is here and being administered, but the reality is that we won't get back into some sense of out of this trouble that we're in until the fall is very real, and very discouraging too, if you think about it long enough. So we're trying to help out as much as we can for as long as we can. And you'll notice that even the information that you put out today, and I think the due date was March 31st, the same way with the information that we are putting out for the grants that I mentioned in the beginning, March 31st. It's like the relief is coming in quarters. And then hopefully by the time we get to March 31st, there'll already be a new program available and more relief on the way. And I think that's the way government has approached it, by segmenting it up so that we can keep providing as much as possible. And I think that the leadership at all levels of government recognize that we can't stop this process, and we'll be doing this until we don't have to do it anymore, but we don't see that in the very near future. So we ask people to hang in there and hold on as much as they can until we get to a better place. Your car. I believe that might be all the questions that we have, Nick. Let me just double check just to make sure. I don't see anything else in here. We published that one. I think we're good to go. So we'll wrap up here. If anyone has a question that you did not ask, please submit it now or say hold on while you type it. But from our standpoint in the county and those who reached out to you, Nick, I want to thank you for being here, and your time is precious, and I always value people's time. You could be doing a lot of other things, but this audience needed you and you showed up. And again, I think that your new information is very helpful. And as you heard, there are existing questions and there'll be more questions, but knowing where to find the right answers is half the battle. And great people like yourself and others who make themselves available to help those in need cannot be stated enough. So on behalf of County Executive Mark Elrich, I want to thank you for joining us today.
It was my pleasure, and be happy to come back as needed.
All right, that sounds good. And for everyone listening, I want to thank you for participating. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back on February the 5th with another town hall, hopefully provide more relevant information that will help you make the decisions that you need in order to improve yourselves and take advantage of resources that are available. So until then, everyone, thank you for joining in and take care.